Steve McQueen adjusted his fireman's helmet one more time. The brim cast a perfect shadow across his ice-blue eyes as Paul Newman ran through his lines for the 15th time that morning. Newman didn't notice the adjustment. He was too busy being Paul Newman. What Newman didn't know was that McQueen had been studying him for weeks, watching every gesture, every pause, every moment of practiced perfection. And Steve McQueen had just figured out how to destroy him. It was March 1974, and Hollywood had never seen anything like the Towering Inferno. Two of the biggest stars in the world trapped together in a burning skyscraper, both fighting for the same thing, to be the last man standing when the cameras stopped rolling. But this wasn't about acting. This was about survival, and only one of them understood the rules of the game they were playing. Paul Newman arrived on the Fox Studios lot like conquering royalty. 30 years of stardom had taught him exactly where he belonged, at the top. Yale educated, classically trained, the golden boy who could do no wrong. He stepped out of his Porsche wearing a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair catching the California sun like a crown. Newman had every reason to feel confident. He was Paul Newman. The Sting had just made him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. Cool Hand Luke had made him a legend. He was sophistication itself. And everyone knew it. Steve McQueen pulled up on his motorcycle. No suit, work boots, a t-shirt that had seen better days. He looked like he'd wandered onto the wrong set. Newman glanced at him once, then looked away. Message delivered. Message received. The first table read was supposed to be a formality. Director Irwin Allen gathered the cast around a long conference table covered in scripts and coffee cups. Newman sat at the head of the table. Naturally, McQueen found a chair halfway down next to the stunt coordinators and technical advisors. Nobody thought anything of it. That's where motorcycle guys belonged. Newman opened his script with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. His character, the architect Doug Roberts, was sophisticated, intelligent, morally complex. Everything Newman did best. He read his first monologue about structural engineering and fire safety codes with perfect diction, each word precisely delivered. It was a masterclass in dramatic technique. McQueen listened. His character, Fire Chief Michael O'Halloran, was the working-class hero, rough around the edges, a man of action, not words. When his turn came, McQueen read his lines simply, without theatrics, just the words, nothing fancy. Interesting choice, Newman said when McQueen finished. The tone was polite, but the insult was surgical. Very natural, McQueen smiled. Thanks, Paul. I try to keep it real. After the table read, Newman cornered director Irwin Allen. I hope we're clear on the billing, Newman said. Alphabetical order puts Newman before McQueen. Allen nodded. Of course, Paul, you're the star. But McQueen was listening from around the corner, and Steve McQueen smiled. Newman had just made a fatal mistake. He'd shown his hand. This wasn't about making a movie. This was about ego. And ego, McQueen knew, was something you could use against a man. McQueen had grown up poor in Indiana and Missouri. Reform schools, foster homes, street fights. He'd learned early that the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who talked about being tough and those who were. Newman talked beautifully, but McQueen had lived ugly, and ugly knew how to win. The next morning, filming began on stage 16, a massive sound stage dressed as the lobby of the glass tower. Newman arrived in his three-piece suit, looking every inch the successful architect. McQueen showed up in his fire chief uniform, heavy coat, boots, and that helmet. The helmet that would change everything. The scene was Newman's showcase. A long, dramatic monologue about the dangers of cutting corners in construction. Important dialogue, character development, the kind of scene that wins awards. Newman positioned himself center frame, hit his mark perfectly, and began to speak. McQueen stood to his left, slightly behind him, just another character in the scene. Except McQueen was adjusting his helmet, not obviously, just a slight tilt of the brim. The shadow fell across his eyes differently. Something about the angle caught the light. Newman delivered his lines flawlessly, but when Irwin Allen called cut, something strange happened. The crew applauded, not for Newman, for the scene in general, but their eyes weren't on Newman anymore. They were looking at McQueen. Newman noticed. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He'd just delivered a perfect performance. Why weren't they looking at him? They shot the scene again. Newman, if anything, was even better the second time, more passionate, more committed. But McQueen made another adjustment. This time he shifted his weight, a subtle movement that drew the eye without seeming to try. When Allen called cut again, the crew was still looking at McQueen. During lunch, Newman sat with Allen and the producers, important people discussing important things. McQueen sat with the stunt guys and the grips, blue-collar guys who knew what real work looked like. But McQueen was watching Newman's table, studying their body language, listening to their conversation. "I'm not sure Steve understands his role in this film," Newman was saying. "He seems to think he's the lead." Allen looked uncomfortable. "Paul, Steve's character is crucial to the story. The fire chief who saves everyone. Audiences love him." "Audiences love authenticity," Newman corrected. "And authentic acting requires training, discipline, technique, not just whatever it is Steve is doing." What Steve was doing was winning. But Newman didn't understand that yet. The afternoon brought the first major action sequence. A fire breaks out on the 81st floor. Newman's character realizes his building is a death trap. McQueen's character leads the rescue. It should have been McQueen's scene, but Newman had other ideas. "Irwin," Newman said before the cameras rolled, "I think Doug would be more active here, more heroic. He wouldn't just stand around while the fire chief takes charge." Allen nodded. "Good point. Let's give you some business." Business. That was the key word. In Hollywood, business meant activity, movement, something for the camera to follow. And Newman had just asked for more of it. But McQueen understood business better than Newman realized. When the scene began, Newman threw himself into the action. He was pointing, gesturing, grabbing people, being very actively heroic. It was a performance, a good performance. McQueen did something different. He took off his helmet. One simple motion. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Real sweat from the hot studio lights. Then he put the helmet back on, adjusted the chin strap, and looked directly into the camera for just a fraction of a second. It wasn't acting. It was living. And the camera loved it. When they watched the dailies that evening, the difference was impossible to ignore. Newman looked like an actor playing a hero. McQueen looked like a hero who happened to be on camera. The audience, even in that small screening room, leaned forward when McQueen was on screen. They respectfully watched when Newman was performing. Newman sat in the back row of the screening room, his face unreadable in the dark, but his hands were clenched. He'd been in this business for 30 years. He knew what he was seeing. He was being upstaged by someone he'd written off as a pretty face with a motorcycle. After the screening, Newman approached McQueen in the parking lot. "Steve, can we talk?" "Sure, Paul. What's on your mind?" "I think we need to discuss our characters, make sure we're not stepping on each other." McQueen leaned against his motorcycle. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You're very physical in your performance. Lots of movement. It's distracting." "From what?" "From the story, from the dialogue, from what the scene is actually about." McQueen lit a cigarette. "What's it about, Paul?" "It's about people trapped in an impossible situation, fighting for survival, discovering what they're really made of when everything they thought they knew about safety and security collapses around them." McQueen took a long drag. "Sounds like you've got it figured out." "I do, and I think you'd be more effective if you pulled back a little. Let the words do the work." "Words are important," McQueen agreed. But people don't remember speeches, Paul. They remember moments. And moments happen with your hands, your eyes, your whole body, not just your mouth. Newman's jaw tightened. That's a very pedestrian way of looking at acting. Maybe, but it works. The next day, word spread around the set. Newman had gone to Alan, not to complain, exactly, but to express concerns about McQueen's approach to the character. Too much improvisation, too much physical business, not enough respect for the script. Alan found himself in an impossible position. Newman was the established star, the bankable name, the actor with the proven track record. But McQueen was electricity on camera, raw magnetism that couldn't be taught or faked. "Steve," Alan said during a break, "Paul feels like you're changing things without discussing it with him first." "What kind of things?" "The helmet adjustments, the way you move through scenes. It's unconventional." McQueen smiled. "Unconventional? Is that bad?" "Not bad. Just different from what Paul expected." "What did Paul expect?" Alan hesitated. "I think he expected you to be supportive. Of him, of his performance. His character is the lead, the hero, the audience identification figure. And what's my character? The professional, the expert, the man who knows how to handle the crisis. So when there's a fire, who do people look to? The architect who designed the building, or the fire chief who's going to get them out alive?" Alan didn't have an answer for that. The breaking point came during the film's climactic sequence, the final escape from the top of the burning tower, Newman and McQueen together, leading the survivors to safety. It should have been their moment of mutual triumph. Instead, it became a masterclass in screen dominance. Newman delivered a stirring speech about human courage and the will to survive. Beautiful words, perfectly spoken. The camera held on his face as he inspired the other characters to keep fighting, keep climbing, keep believing in the possibility of rescue. McQueen listened to the speech. Then he walked to the edge of the set, looked down at the miniature city far below, and shook his head. Not dismissively, thoughtfully, like a man who'd seen too much death to believe in pretty speeches about survival. When the camera found McQueen again, he wasn't looking at Newman. He was looking at the fire, and his face said everything Newman's speech had tried to say, but without words. "This is real. This is dangerous. People are going to die unless we move right now." Newman finished his speech and waited for the applause. There wasn't any. The crew was watching McQueen, waiting to see what he'd do next. McQueen put his helmet back on, checked his equipment, and said 4 words, "Let's get them out." That night, after wrap, Newman found McQueen in his dressing room. McQueen was out of costume, back in jeans and a t-shirt, packing his motorcycle gear. "You think you're pretty clever," Newman said. "Do I?" "The strong, silent type, very appealing, very commercial. Is that what I am?" "You're uneducated, Steve. You don't understand what real acting is. You think it's all instinct and motorcycles and looking cool, but acting is craft. It's technique. It's years of training and study and respect for the art form." McQueen zipped up his leather jacket. "You're right, Paul. I never went to Yale, never studied Shakespeare, never learned the proper way to hold a martini glass or discuss Proust at cocktail parties." Newman smiled. Finally, an admission. "But I learned something you never did," McQueen continued. "I learned how to watch people, really watch them. And I can tell you something about audiences that your acting teachers never mentioned." "What's that?" "They don't want to watch actors act. They want to watch people live. And the difference between those two things is the difference between you and me." Newman's face flushed. "You arrogant piece of—" "Careful, Paul. Your education is showing." The film was released 6 months later. The critics were unanimous. Paul Newman gave a solid professional performance as the architect, but Steve McQueen was the heart of the film, the soul. The reason people stayed in their seats instead of running for the exits when the building started burning down. Newman won no awards for the Towering Inferno. McQueen didn't either. But McQueen didn't need awards. He had something more valuable, the knowledge that he'd beaten the golden boy at his own game, not with technique or training or perfect diction, but with truth. Years later, when film students asked Newman about working with McQueen, he was gracious, professional. Steve was unique, he'd say. He had an instinct for the camera that can't be taught. But privately, Newman never forgot the lesson McQueen had taught him, that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't play by your rules, who doesn't even know your rules exist, who simply shows up, does the work, and lets the camera decide who's really the star. Steve McQueen never made it to Yale. He never studied with the great acting teachers or performed Shakespeare in prestigious theater companies, but he understood something that Paul Newman, for all his education and sophistication, had to learn the hard way. Authenticity can't be acted. It can only be lived. The fireman's helmet is still in the Warner Brothers prop warehouse. Just another piece of movie history gathering dust. But for those few months in 1974, it was the weapon Steve McQueen used to prove that being real beats being right every single time. Have you ever been underestimated because of your background, only to prove them wrong?